Salutations everybody, it is Matty here today. Hope you're all doing absolutely excellent. Today we're gathering to talk about a genre that is getting mighty competitive, and that is the action RPG genre. I've been a fan not since like the old Diablo days like many of you probably have been. For me, it really started with Champions Return to Arms and Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance. I lived and breathed these games on my PS2 for a very long time. When they got re-released with their HD remasters, I was all over them, still hoping Champions comes back, but to me, that is my connection to the action RPG genre. Then growing up even further when it came to the PSP, Untold Legends. Come on now. I mean, I just loved these types of games growing up. So anytime I see a new action RPG, that little bit of my childhood comes back to life and I get so excited about it. So what I wanted to tell you all about today is Dragonkin the Banished. It's a $20 early access action RPG. It finds itself in that same bin of games like your Path of Exile 2, your Diablo 4, and I just like how competitive this genre is getting. We've talked about all of these games across reviews, previews, impressions, and whatnot. So when this crossed my desk, I thought, A, it was a good opportunity to talk about a smaller game, see how things are going here, but B, and most importantly for both you and me, gotta be able to say how I feel about these games, especially when it's early access. That's not gonna come out perfect unless, like, I guess if you're a Baldur's Gate 3, but even that I waited for the full release on. And with that in mind, also, this video is sponsored, so I think it's important that when I do these types of videos, I can give my opinion in an unfettered manner. But yeah, obviously, early access indicates like you're going to be waiting for the full sauce to be there. What I can say is it is a solid start given the price tag, but I do think it needs a lot of work to be part of what is a very competitive genre. But at the same time, this price tag does feel very self-aware that given you're getting the prologue in a single chapter before hitting the early endgame is what I'll call it, where you'll embark on draconic hunts. The game has a lot of cool ideas. I want to explore them here today. So thank you for being here in a different style video. Let's sit down and talk about Dragonkin the Banished. If you're new here and you're interested in this type of content, consider subscribing. So let's start off with one of the things I think the game gets right. It's the playability. Immediately they throw you in. I think that should be goal number one of any self-respecting action RPG. But one thing I did talk about a bit with Path of Exile 2 is I like how it took its story and its world very seriously, and that caught my attention. But that doesn't mean it's the only way to do things. It's not the purely exclusively right way to do things. And while there is a focus on presentation with Dragonkin that I'll talk about and how it sometimes hurts the game, one of the best things about it is that it throws you in. And the reason that's important is because it throws you into testing the classes, basically. A lot of times I am guilty of getting complete choice paralysis at the beginning of really any RPG. You're reading skill trees, character bios, class bios, race bios, and you're trying to put all of this together and hope that when you roll the dice, things go well. Modern game design has made it where you can pull yourself out of that hole a lot easier. And in this game, for example, when you're dedicating points to your attributes, you can respec whenever you want. You have the ancestral grid we'll talk about. You can move those pieces around however you want. So you don't get pigeonholed as easily nowadays, but this game starts off, I think, on the right foot because you play through 4 different classes to open up the prologue and the story and create the backdrop for this universe. So instead of trying to read everything, you just kind of play and feel it out, and it made my decision immediately very easy, which then I dove into the full game after that. So the classes that are available in early access are the Knight, Oracle, and Barbarian. The Knight is more of a melee / defensive build. You're going to strike forward for range or sweep the surrounding area for massive enemy wipes. The skills are going to require what's called fuel, and this will just build up over time. The Oracle is more of a distance / AoE style character. You'll have waves of electricity that'll wipe out rows of enemies. You'll have lightning spells you can call down that'll explode and take out a ton of enemies at once. And there's also the vision gauge, which increases the impact of the next skill that you pull, plus reducing the energy cost of said skill. So you have a good cycle there. And then last but not least, as I mentioned, is the Barbarian, which is another melee class, but it is more aggro focused. You'll have these earth-shattering melee attacks, spinning attacks that also clear. You have a rage meter that increases by doing damage, but also taking it. So high rage equals higher damage dealt and less energy spent on the skill. Now, I do think there is a fine line between these classes overlapping in a lot of ways, but also kind of feeling distinct. A lot of it leans on the ancestral grid, which we'll talk about, but the starting place for a lot of these classes, I think, gets off on the bad foot because you have the Knight and the Barbarian, which the way you approach combat might be differently, but as I'll talk about with how you just saw through enemies pretty easily in this game by the way it's balanced, I don't really engage deeply in the mechanics of any one class, where I didn't feel like there was like a best suited option. It was just what do you kind of feel like holding the left click button to and then mashing out a couple of abilities to after? What I mean by this is that every class has their own one-on-one ability, their own area of effect ability, and their own escape. And I do think that leading in with 2 melee characters wasn't the best idea, because the prologue does show off a ranger class, which is giving you 2 ranged options, but that really wasn't here in the full build. So to get in a little bit to, speaking of builds, the actual character build is beyond the actual class itself. You'll be managing your ancestral grid. Basically, this is where you're going to attach your abilities, your modifiers, your wormling skills. Good time to mention that you get a little baby dragon that flies around with you here in this game, which is pretty cool. But basically, the character skills, you can equip up to 5 of them, and these are just your general character abilities, and you can swap these out, as well as modifiers, which will then change your attack speed, your movement speed. So as you invest more in the character, you'll see them gradually shape based on how you want to build them. While the skills, no doubt, are what you're really there for, I think the modifiers are what you truly feel like when you're getting around the map really quickly, or you're attacking really quickly. It just gives you a level of customization that I think feels pretty good once it starts to come online. You combine that with when you level up, you can spend attribute points to upgrade like your strength or your health, and the talents that you'll get, which are passive abilities. And so the build crafting composition here is pretty good. Now, when you only get a prologue and a chapter, it's pretty difficult to feel all of that out completely. Obviously, it's early access, so that's fair. And again, I think it's priced fairly, but it makes you wonder like how this is going to be in the long run. Because to me right now, the problem I have with the gameplay is it looks good. It feels pretty solid. It's just that like enemies are squishy. You just kind of fly through everything in the game. I only popped a potion a couple of times. So that is one thing I think they can improve. But your basic gameplay loop here is hold the left click. Enemy dies, they're going to vomit some loot. You're going to swap out your old gear with new gear and repeat. And as you get resources, you're going to invest them into this city and grow its prosperity level. And you're going to unlock new features like shops. These are shops like the apothecary, the jeweler, the jailer. But as you approach the city, like the way it's first introduced, I was like, why is this place so big? At first, I thought it was kind of like a GTA moment. You know, like GTA will take you on like long car rides because you have to have these characters have these full conversations, or Red Dead Redemption 2, these long horseback rides. So these characters can have these conversations in this pocket, or I guess you can skip them if you're a maniac. But I thought that's what was happening here, because you run through what is like a very straight path throughout an entire city, and these 2 characters are just going at it back and forth the whole time. And I was just like, oh my God, is this what they're going to do all game? They do not, to be very clear. But I did get that similar feeling when Almantia was talking during the prologue. And as you're just slicing through enemies, this exposition is just being laid on you pretty thick. And I do feel like they could have balanced out the story presentation with the gameplay just a little bit. I know people are here just to kill and loot, but since there's so much dialogue, it can just drone in the background rather than being an engaging part of the game. But when it's first hitting me, it's when you get to this city that you can upgrade, and then you start to understand when you get to upgrade it and you can fast travel all around it. Oh, that's why this city was so big and you were running through it all, because otherwise it just felt like you were running through a pathway. But then you see the breadth of mechanics there, and it makes a lot more sense. Now, the story, speaking of which, is about blood dragons and legendary heroes rising up to destroy said dragons, and you'll expand your city, as I mentioned earlier, while you do that. Pretty simple story premise. Again, I don't think you really come to these games for incredible stories. I would like for a game in this genre to really break the mold and be like, actually. But the other thing that I want to talk about is the long-term roadmap here. They do have their launch planned out, where they say prologue in chapter 1, 3 heroes, ancestral grid system for wormlings, the city of Montiscale, and the endgame content. In the spring, though, you're going to get a new environment, new skills for heroes, new city features, new endgame content, and endgame activity. In the summer, new hero, new environment, new skills for heroes, new city features, new endgame content. And in autumn, you have the multiplayer implementation, the new skills for heroes, new city features. My 2 cents is that I think the game needs more time. What I would say is this is a good keep your eye on it candidate if you are an action RPG fan, and what would be best for you is to check back in around autumn time, see what's happening with this game, because I think with the multiplayer implementation is when it can really come to life. I think that plus some real gameplay tuning could do this game a lot of favors, because I know these games aren't supposed to be grinding you down with pure difficulty, but when you're just kind of holding left click and you don't need to even engage with some of your bare abilities before all of the modifiers and everything, it does kind of ask for an extra level of toughness. So I do think the game has a decent amount of potential, but overall for me, I think it just needs more time. But for the price tag it's at, again, I think the team is pretty self-aware of where they're at. And I do think for a game that is coming from a team of approximately 40 as of at least 2020, when I was looking up more into the developer, I do appreciate what they're trying to do here. Because when I first saw it, I went, oh, this must be an absolutely massive team working on this, because things like the cutscenes that are there, all the way to the VFX and the animations, look pretty solid, where I'm like, this feels like a big team. To learn that, oh, this is actually a pretty small team compared to its competition, does give it a little bit of credibility in my eyes, where I go, all right, this is why it's worth keeping my eyes on. If I was sitting here talking about like a massive AAA game, hundreds of people working on it, I'd be humming a different tune for sure. But looking at it as what it is, I gotta say it was a solid enough time to keep my eye on it. So I'll be looking into it in autumn when multiplayer is implemented and seeing how things evolve then. But ladies and gentlemen, let me know what you think of Dragonkin down below. Will you be checking this out in early access? Fire away. Other than that, please take excellent care of yourselves, and I will catch you in the next video. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.